Namaskar and welcome to Delhi Thinkers Dialogue. Today, the title of our discussion is Deculturalization of the Northeast region in India. The Northeast region in India is a part, as most of you might know, of India that is very close to my heart. I have traveled extensively in the region and spent many years on research and field work, studying tribal affairs, demographic change, culture, religion, as well as insurgency and conflict. And from my observations and study of the region, the one thing that was apparent to me was that no other region in the country, no other people of any other state in the country have been transformed the way the northeastern states have over the last 100 years. The regional demography, religion, education, everything has changed with various external influences. And I agree, there may have been some benefits to it as well. But the long term damage to a unique region and culture was very, very palpable to me when I was there, to the extent that I think about a year and a half ago, I was able to have a 3 day long, almost a 50 scholar rich conference in Manipur on this very topic. It was called Religious and Cultural Transitions in the Northeast, for which our book will be coming out this month. But that is the kind of content that this topic has demanded. But before we begin, I just want to shed a little light on what I mean here by deculturalization. And let me say this at the outset, that it is not anywhere close to assimilation. It's quite the opposite. Deculturalization is the process by which an ethnic group is forced to abandon its language, its culture, its customs. To me, it is the destruction of the culture of a dominated group and its replacement by the culture of the dominating group. There are various ways by which happen. For instance, by forceful replacement of religious practices, by forceful replacement of languages, by the majority group dominating the education system. And as I have observed, even the government framework in some regions, which is very, very alarming. All of this, of course, can also be done by limiting the freedom to practice an indigenous way of life, which is again done in multiple ways. In the states of the Northeast, I found all of these parameters, absolutely all of these parameters and more, which met the background of what deculturalization means. But to obviously understand this further and to delve deeper into how deculturalization is taking place in the Northeast and amongst the people that are living there, what are the causes, what are the effects, what are the threats, what are maybe even some of the benefits, I have to say that Delhi Thinkers Dialogue is absolutely honored to have some of the finest scholars and thinkers from 3 different states in the region today. From Arunachal Pradesh, we have Mr. Pai Dawe, the president of the Nishi Indigenous Faiths and Cultural Society. Mr. Dawe is also the Prancha Pramukh of the Vivekanand Kendra in Arunachal Pradesh. He is also very well known for composing a number of very popular Nishi songs. He has produced and directed short films and video albums in Nishi. And finally, he is also, apart from doing all of this, he is also a member of the Art of Living. From Meghalaya, we have Shri Shankar Pandey. He is a scholar from the Department of Law, Northeastern Hill University in Shillong. He's also a graduate diploma in human rights. He is presently also the founder of the Northeast India Center for Study, and Research and co-convener for Forum for Integrated National Security, Meghalaya chapter. From Assam, we have Shrutikar Abhijit Sharma. He is the Executive Director for Institute for Conflict Research and Resolution, a think tank based out of Guwahati. He has authored many research papers and is an established columnist. He has also recently published an intervention paper on the topic named Satras, an endangered soul of Assam, which also happens to be the subject that he will be shedding some light on today. Finally, we have a very special guest with us today, Mr. Ram Mayappan. Ram is an ace lawyer from Chennai with an academic background impressively in mathematics and commerce. Though he comes from a long lineage of traders and businessmen, he is also an athlete and a mountaineer and has had the opportunity to interact and work with the Pahari people in the south as well as in Himachal Pradesh. Ram also happens to be a fellow of the Tamil Nadu Young Thinkers Forum as well as associated to India Foundation. So, without much ado, I would like to begin with Mr. Pai Dawe. Mr. Dawe, welcome to Delhi Thinkers Dialogue. I am so pleased that you could join us today. I myself have very fond memories of Arunachal Pradesh. The first time I traveled there, it was a hugely long journey because uh, I went by train and then I went by road, and it was the timings were like in the middle of the night and the train was empty. So it was all very exciting. But I remember reaching there and finding the beauty of the state awe-inspiring. Having said that, I happen to visit a fairly troubled region of the state. I traveled through Changlang and Tira, which was, of course, very, very beautiful. But I still remember we had to return, and my car driver, he was getting very, very panicky because he wanted us to return exactly before 4 o'clock. Because in those days, there used to be a curfew, and there was, and I still believe that there is, even now, imminent danger from the insurgents who used to block these borders. And 4 o'clock was the time that you had to return back to the city. Um, Having said that, I remember meeting various tribal groups and they being extremely, concerned about the future of their indigenous culture and faith and the future of how they were going to preserve this. Mr. Dawe, I'd like to begin this conversation by asking you to shed some light on the present day scenario. And what does deculturalization really mean in the context of Arunachal Pradesh to you?
Good evening, Ramiji.
Evening.
As far as deculturalization is concerned, Arunachal Pradesh, especially Arunachal Pradesh, is a region where rapidly deculturalization is taking place. There may be a lot of factors may be there which attribute to the degradation or deculturalization. But importantly, there are three factors which is the most influential for the deculturalization or degradation of culture in this region, especially in Arunachal Pradesh. One is lack of documentation. In Arunachal Pradesh, there are, as you may be knowing, there are 26 major tribes and 124 sub-tribes. And except Buddhism, all the tribes, they don't have the scripts, therefore don't have the documentation of their tradition and culture. So these tradition and culture knowledge are being passing orally from generation to generation. So because of that, at some point of time, somewhere down the line, this gets diluted and it attributes to the deculturalization or degradation of the culture, we may say. And the second point is the advancement of the modernity. Because of the advancement of the modernity, our people, those younger generation, they don't no more stay in the village with the parents or with the elders. They go out abroad or across the country in pursuit to their career. and they stay in the urban areas. So this tradition of passing orally is abruptly disconnected with the modern, this the young generation. So the young generation, they are not connected with the villagers or the elders who has the treasures or of this tradition, knowledge of tradition and culture. So they are much towards to the modern culture, and they adopt the westernization and all. Most important factors of this deculturalization or degradation is the influence of the missionaries. In Arunachal Pradesh, missionaries came in 1920, but they have been very actively since 1970. From 1970 onwards, they have been very active. And these missionaries, along with them, they have come with the three things. One is education, and the health, and the third is religion. It's fair enough for any civilization, any human society. These three things are very much needed. But unfortunately, in return of these three things, they have taken everything from us. They have destroyed the basic fabric social structure of these indigenous tribal people of Arunachal Pradesh. Our ancestor, we never had any differences in the name of faith, in the name of religion. But because of the influence of missionaries, because of the influence of this westernization, now our people, they are swearing on each other in the name of religion, in the name of the faith. This is very unfortunate, and this is the main degradation, the cultural is taking place. And we never, in our tradition and culture, we never had a culture of destroying the other belief, destroying other faiths. Rather, we encourage, we encourage and we help other culture, other faiths to grow and to prosper. But today we are observing that we are destroying each other faiths. Recently, you might be knowing, it was in the national news also. These the mercenary people, they have burned down these altars and the pictures of our god and indigenous god and goddesses, and it has become, it has god hue and cry in the states. In this process, they are creating a hatredness among these societies. So this is the result of the degradation and deculturalization taking place. We never, our ancestors never had like this. We are the inclusive nature of faiths. We respect each other's religion, we respect each other cultures. But because of the influence of these missionaries and because the influence of the westernization, these things has been completely changed in Arunachal Pradesh.
Thank you, Mr. Dawe. But to ask you a follow-up question, um, as you said, that the influence of the missionaries comes through education, health, and religion. So, would it be correct to say that education and health aid regarding to these areas is only provided if the tribals are converting to Christianity or if they promise to convert? Is it charity for the sake of charity?
It's a sake of the charity. There the values, whatever the values they taught in the schools, they taught in their education, it's not the values what we learn, what we are taught in our culture and tradition. And there are many students, those who have been benefited of these missionary schools after graduating and after passing from this institution, they
Mhm.
start hating our own tradition and culture. This is the biggest problem, uh, that the education they are providing. Other education, other education. If you see the Vivekananda Kendra, Ramakrishna Mission, and all the education, there are lot many officers are there. They have produced lot many maximum officers has been produced by the Vivekananda Kendra in Arunachal Pradesh. But you will see none of those officers, they are against the culture, against their own tradition and culture. But the student and the officers or those who have been graduated from the missionaries school, they are against the tradition and culture, indigenous tradition and cultures. From there, we see that those education are just for the sake of charity, or just for the sake of to attract those innocent indigenous people, tribal people.
Correct, correct. Mr. Dave, could you also shed some light for our audience? As you know, that a lot of the central media does not cover the Northeast so much. So, a lot of our audience may not know about the indigenous faiths in Arunachal Pradesh, especially your tribe. Could you shed some light on your tribe, your faith, and how has the Nishi tribe resisted this sort of predatory influence? And also, I would like to, I know that there are some, there are not some, but actually quite a few um larger Hindu civilizational references in Arunachal Pradesh. So, for example, there is the Parshuram Kund. Um, could you shed some light on this sort of civilizational link?
Yeah, actually, this Nabi Nishi indigenous Nishi people, we our belief is inclusive in nature.
Correct.
Our faith is inclusive in nature. We believe omnipresence of the God. That's the reason why we revere or we worship the nature and the five elements of the universe. Because we believe that every living being there is a God. And this is the same philosophy the Vedanta we find in the Vedanta, the Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vedanti, we find in the Vedanta, we find in this Sanatan Dharma. Actually, we feel that Nishi, with the Nishi tribes, our faith is the means actual way of the Sanatan Dharma. We are practicing practical. We are practicing the Sanatan Dharma philosophy. So in that case, we are very much akin to the Hindu religion, and in our olden days, our elders and we also still I remember we come down from the village and we celebrate Dasera, Diwali with a lot of enthusiasm and devotion. But because of this influence of this Christianity, as soon as the Christianity came into active in this area, this has been decreasing. Now people are not no more they are celebrating Dasera, no more celebrating Vishwakarma Puja. Even though some section of the people, if even if they celebrate, the majority of the people get irritation and they lose a lot many complaints. So what our indigenous people in these Nishi indigenous people we believe is we are very much akin to the Hindu culture, Hindu tradition. Though our the food habits, our looks, our lifestyles may be different, but the core belief, the core values of the culture that is exactly same with the Sanatan Dharma philosophy and the Hindu Dharma philosophy. That's why we believe ourselves, particularly the indigenous people of this area, believe that we are of the same of the Sanatan Dharma and we are same to the Hindu culture. And for us, this as far as our this tradition, we are getting a lot of. I mean, there are division is taking place now in our society because of this Christianity. Every issues are being looking in the prism of faith, and majority is the Christian now, and they are dominating. So now the society which have been living in a very peaceful and congenial atmosphere, but because of these faiths, now there is restlessness is there, hatredness is there. This is a very means worrisome for the states and worrisome for the us, but still we indigenous people they are surviving with the help of this many organization, our sister organization, they are helping us. And we are now our people also many intellectual peoples they are coming out, and the youths are coming out for the preservation of the tradition and cultures. They are doing the research, they are interpreting our these folklores and folk tales. Recently we have conducted online folk tales where many intellectual people, many youth have participated, and many have appreciated these initiatives. In that way, these indigenous now people are realizing the importance of our indigenous cultures and they are coming out, and we hope that in days to come definitely they will begin, they will work more for this preservation of the tradition and culture, and definitely we will able to establish our faith more strong in this region.
Absolutely, I'm sure with the kind of scholarly work that is coming out of Arunachal Pradesh, the kind of leaders that are coming out of Arunachal Pradesh, I think, very swiftly it's leaving a mark on not just India but the rest of the world. But to ask you just a few more questions, sir, I would want to know I had read these very alarming statistics about in the 1970s, beginning of 1970s, the converted people being at around 0.7%. And today there are estimates that in 2020 it's almost 40%. Is this true? Number one. And if this is true, how many from your tribe do you think have been converted and have left their indigenous practices?
Yes, exactly, Remiji. During 1952, there was no single Christian was there in the 50s. But now at present, exactly as you said, it's now 40, around 40%. And particularly our tribe, Nisi tribe, is the largest tribe in Arunachal Pradesh. We consist of one third population of the states. And unfortunately, 60% of our tribes, particularly Nisi tribes, they have converted into the Christian. They have denounced the ancestral faith. This is a very alarming situation in our states. But as I said, we are trying for that, and we are very much optimistic about that. And many people are, even the government, they have created this Department of Indigenous Affairs to look after the indigenous faith and culture. But still, we have there is some lacking on that because of the maybe new because of the new department. There is no concrete plan and program for the preservation of the indigenous culture, tradition, and culture. But we hope that these things will be sorted out, and we will work for that.
Correct. So, my last question to you is do you see the anti conversion law in Arunachal Pradesh being effective, or are there implementation issues? Because I remember there was a statement also made by your chief minister a couple of months ago saying that, they would revoke the anti conversion law. So, what are your views on that, and where do you see the problems in its effectiveness?
Yes, this is very unfortunate that during 1978 they have adopted or enacted one act called Arunachal Pradesh Freedom of Religion Act during 1978. But since it is 43 years, they have not implemented. We have not seen since 43 years. We have not seen any person who have been booked or who have been taken action because of this act. Though they have committed a lot many things, as I have said, they have burned down the altars, burned down the indigenous god and goddesses. But though they have these laws, this act, but they have not taken any action against. This has need to be make a very strong and relevant. And yeah, recently you have rightly said. Recently, our chief minister also had proposed to repeal this law, and there was a means hue and cry from our indigenous people, and we have launched the protest. We have made the chief minister also regarding this. This need to be strengthened uh, instead of repealing. And we have actually, to be very frank, we expected lot many things from this government, particularly the BJP government from the center or the state, being a pro-indigenous faith government. We expected a lot, but as of now, they have not taken as they are not doing up to the expectation for us, particularly for the indigenous people. So we have submitted a lot many proposals regarding this. We have appealed to the government also, central government also, state government also, to strengthen this Arunachal Pradesh Freedom of Religions Act and to bring anti-conversion law in the center and as well as in a state. The difficulty is in implementing, there is a difficulty in implementing is that, as I said, majority is a Christian in Arunachal Pradesh. Even so the after all those policy makers, the lawmakers, they are a politician. They are afraid. They always want for the vote. They are looking for the votes only. So even if they take even if they think for the indigenous people, for the even these our chief minister, they are very much he is very much interested for the indigenous, preserving the indigenous people, indigenous culture, indigenous faiths. But their cabinets, their ministers, their MLAs, and the people, those who have voted them, they are the majority is the Christian. So they are restraining themselves. They are reluctant to take a bold step or an aggressive step towards the preserving the indigenous faith and the culture. This is the one thing it's worrying us, particularly for the indigenous people. So we need a certain leader, we need certain political party who irrespective of seeing the voters or seeing the powers, who think for the indigenous people, and we hope that in future this may change, and our leader may listen to us, and our leader may understand our problem, and they also now also they understand. But because of the certain circumstances, because the majority of the people, they are succumb to the pressure, that's why they are not implementing this law also. They are not making it in the strong enough.
Correct. Thank you so much, Mr. Dawe, for that enlightening session. I think you have put a lot of basics of this issue in context for us. And I think you brought something very important to light, which is political will. You know, the importance of political will um, to preserve and maintain our indigenous way of life. Thank you so much. I'd like to move next to our speaker, Mr. Shankar Pandey. Mr. Pandey, thank you for joining us today. It is a privilege for us to have you with us. I, of course, have known your work and your expertise on this subject for a long time, and I hope you can share some ground realities of what is happening in Meghalaya. Meghalaya, again, is a state that I have traveled many times to, but the first time that I traveled again, I was very lucky to travel by road from Assam to a small town in Meghalaya called Tura. And again, it was a magnificent drive. I still remember the roads were lined by natural lotus ponds. Um, and I hope all of us here today uh, get an opportunity to visit your beautiful state one day again. But Shankarji, I would like to ask you to begin this discussion. What really comes to your mind when we speak about deculturalization in the context of Meghalaya?
Good evening, Ramiji. Thank you for providing me this opportunity. Uh, and good evening to my fellow co-panelists also. The issue of deculturalization in the Northeast in general and Meghalaya in particular, I think high time that we discussed this. And I wonder why this issue was not, maybe the dispensation and the environment was not conducive earlier to discuss such topics. But thankfully, we can discuss such topics now. Meghalaya, like you said, became an independent state, separate state in the year 1972. Earlier, it was a part of Assam. Since then, it is functioning as a state, and there are three major tribes in the state of Meghalaya, uh, along with 4 or 5 sub-tribes. The major tribes are Khasi, Jaintia, and Garo. And Khasi Hills, where Shillong is situated, and Jaintia Hills. Jaintia, for you, I mean, for your information, is named after Jainteswari Mata. Um, there is a temple of Jainteswari Mata in Nartiang. It's a very popular temple. And Garo Hills, like you mentioned, Tura. Tura is the capital of Garo Hills. Deculturalization in a way is inevitable. When cultures exchange, they come in contact with each other. In a way, this exchange of culture happen. But here, in the context of Meghalaya, this is not symbiotic. It's a parasitic, and it is very institutionalized. Deculturalization, there is a concerted effort on the part of an organized and well-funded institution. That's church. I mean, I have to call spade a spade. It's a church which is perpetuating this deculturalization of the tribes to the extent that now almost 90% of the Khasis have already abandoned their indigenous faith and culture. And see, the number is astounding in case of Garos. It's almost 100% in case of Garos. In Jaintia, you can say roughly 60 to 65% have already converted. The conversion, I mean, you might say, what's the harm in, if I convert my religion, choose to worship a new god. But here in this context, it's not only about worshiping a new god. The conversion is complete only when you denounce your earlier religion. Denounce, you call it a devil's religion. It's what devil's worship. Once a tribal converts to Christianity, what happens is that he is brainwashed systematically to call his or her own ancestral faith is devil's worship. So they are really brainwashed into believing that their ancestors were following a wrong religion. It was a religion of a devil. Only once they have converted, they have seen the light, so-called light, and that they will be saved. So that brainwashing is systematically indoctrinated into the minds of the tribals. And in case of, like Mr. Pai Dawe was saying, in Arunachal Pradesh, deculturalization is a work in process, whereas in Meghalaya, it is a work completed almost. Now, the situation is such that the Christians dominate virtually every sphere of political and social life, administration, legislature, civil services, police, every field is dominated by Christians, and non-Christians or who are yet to convert, they are hounded. They are persecuted, they are discriminated, and the whole ecosystem is built in such a manner that the courts into finalists succumb, and to convert. Obviously they have no other way but to just to escape this persecution. People convert into Christianity. So the system is such. The whole and there is in Meghalaya. I mean, the paradox is that there is something called district council. District Khasi Hills District Autonomous District Council and Garo Hills and Jaintia Hills Autonomous District Councils, which were formed when Meghalaya was still a part of Assam. So the mandate of this district council, Ramiji, was to safeguard the indigenous faith and culture of the tribal people. And now this institution has become a tool to hound indigenous people to convert, because this institution has been totally hijacked by the missionaries and the Christians. Now, what has happened I think, Abhijit Ji and I was discussing earlier, Kongthong issue. Kongthong, there's a place called Kongthong in Meghalaya, East Khasi Hills, 2-3 hours from Shillong, which is very unique place because of its. It's also called whistling village of India. People call each other by. They have a whistle. It's a unique tone.
Yes.
So there, what happened was the place of worship, the sanctum sanctorium of the indigenous people were desecrated. Christians, mind you, those Christians who desecrated the place of worship had converted only 2 or 3 years back. They were from the same clan. So they went there, they desecrated the place. They have so much of hatred for their own ancestral faith. Now, what does district council do? Indigenous people have certain pujas, certain worship, indigenous worship. They call it dolois and sardars and lingdos. They are priests who perform this puja. Now, Christians obviously cannot be performing these pujas, worship, or this rituals. Now, but just to misappropriate entire sphere of the social and religious aspects, they have appointed Christians as dolois, the priest. In Kongtong, what happened was the indigenous pujari, so-called pujari, the Sardar, who was earlier, since his traditionally their families are placed. He was to perform the puja, but then district council, appointed another Christian person as pujari. Now there was a conflict. Obviously, the natural question was, how can a Christian person perform such indigenous pujas? And the case went to the district council because both the parties were tribals. The district council ruled in favor of the Christian priests. Just imagine. And then we had to take this matter to the High Court, and High Court has been, sitting on it since then. And the same thing happened in Milliam also. There's a place called Milliam. So what happened was the entire, there was only one particular family who were still holding on to their indigenous faith. And once the head of the family of that person died, he was to be cremated in a place in his own village. While the cremation was going on, what happened was, the Christian people, they started protesting. This is not allowed. This cannot be allowed here. This, this kind of pujas or activities, non-Christian activities, cannot be performed here. So they even used school children, to protest such uh, cremation in their village, in very unchristian cremation. So the body had to be taken out. The half-burnt body had to be taken out and, cremated somewhere else. So that is the level of hatred, derision for their own ancestral faith. It's it's mind-boggling. And almost, like I said, almost 90% of the total tribe, these three major tribes are converted. 10% people are definitely facing a lot of issues. Like I said, there's discrimination. And another thing is, uh, I think this is true for all the indigenous tribals of the Northeast. There is something called, Mr. Ramaswamy will be able to throw better light on it. There is something called religious minorities. Article 25, 26, 27, of the Constitution of India, guarantee certain rights to religious minorities. But in case of Meghalaya, who are religious minorities? People the population who comprise it, 90% of the population are branded as religious minorities, whereas the indigenous people who are not, they're just 9 to 10%, they do not come under religious minorities. So what happens is that there are certain many perks and privileges which are covered under religious minorities, like scholarships. Then we have free tuitions, coaching for UPSC and bank exams. Then so the tuition fees sponsored by the government of India. Who are entitled to this? Christians. So now this is, in a way, incentivizing conversion. The people lure the indigenous people by saying that, see, if you convert, then you will be entitled to such this particular this benefit. So why don't you come? Why you want to stay that side? So these are the issues. Ramiji. So
It's Shankarji, it's a very, very complicated situation. And I remember when I traveled there, I was surprised that Tura was, it's a guard of your chief minister,
yes,
right? And I met a small group called the Hajongs,
yes,
also a small minority, And I would want you, as my next question, to address what is the kind of problems that communities like them who probably don't have state citizenship go through. And I'm going to ask the second question together with this so that I don't interrupt you. Is I had also heard of course, over a period of time, I've heard of many incidents that have happened against minority religious places of worship. Most recently, we heard about the Kali Mandir being desecrated. I know there was a hue and cry around it. What has happened? How helpful uh, is the legal system? Is the police towards such minorities and such issues that they face?
yes. Like you mentioned about Hajongs and Hajongs, Kutch and Rajbongsis, Burmans, these are other tribes of Meghalaya. But their population is not substantial enough to be be considered in a so, so what has happened is that they are facing a very unique dilemma. most of these Hajongs, Koors, Rajbangsins, Burmans are Hindus. They are Hindus, and they being Hindus have not helped them at all, their causes at all. Now they are classified as OTs or other tribes in Meghalaya. They don't come under the reservation of tribals per se, but then there is something called all the tribes. So when there's 15 to 20 posts are advertised, and one of the posts are reserved for all the tribes in Meghalaya civil service as well. Now they practice their ancestral faith. Most of the Hazongs are still maintaining their indigenous faith. Hazongs, Burmans, and Kots. And district council, like I mentioned earlier, they have some nominated seats for Hazongs and Kots. Now, this particular present government it has decided that they will do away with the seats which were reserved for other tribes, that means Hazongs and Kots, because they don't consider them important enough. First of all, their population is not very significant enough. Second thing is they are on religious grounds also they are persecuted, because there is always pressure from certain quarters that why should they avail certain benefits which other Christian tribes are availing. So that pressure is there definitely, and even in district council, what happens is that there is a law called trading by non-tribals regulation, whereas in Meghalaya, any non-tribal who wishes to start a business or run a business has to obtain a license or an NOC from district councils. Now, very, very interesting is that some of the other tribes also do have to obtain these licenses as if they are non-tribal. So they are, they don't have a voice. Obviously, they don't, want to make a much noise about it. They don't want to be seen in a controversy. So they are in a. So overall, these indigenous minorities in Meghalaya are living in a very fierce psychosis. So to say, they don't want to disturb the status quo. Okay, जो चल रहा है चलने दो. Don't want to come in the limelight. Okay, जैसे भी चल रहा है चल रहा है. And the one thing I would like to say is that Mr. Pai Dawe earlier said that there is a huge disappointment. Yes, is with regards to because people were expecting too much, maybe unrealistic expectations also, but maybe some of the expectations were realistic. I think the present dispensation has not been able to meet that. Because first of all, there could be many reasons for that. First of all, they may not be really they don't know what exactly is happening at the ground level. Maybe the vote number games also is at play. So indigenous communities are, in a way, just yesterday only, I was talking with some members of Burman community, and they are saying, "Oh, we are very disappointed. They have not helped us at all. Instead, in this dispensation, we are being targeted. तुम्हारा government सरकार center में है, तो क्या कर लिया तुम लोगों ने? All those kind of things." So yes, yeah. Coming back to the your second question. Yes. What was the second question, Ramiji?
About the Kali temple,
Yes.
which was in the news and there was a hue and cry about it. But I'd like to learn a little bit more about the response given by the people who would be responsible for keeping and safeguarding these properties.
Okay. In Meghalaya, especially in Garo Hills and along the international border, Indo-Bangladesh border, this Hajong, Koch, the majority communities are these people. So in a way, you can say that indigenous and Hindu people, dominate the Indo-Bangladesh borders along there. So in the place called Dauki, Sonakala, and this place, a lot of Kali temples and Durga temples are situated. So this particular temple in West Garo Hills, was desecrated, and obviously the most expected response from the authorities was that no, this is the handiwork of some vandals, and there is no communal angle to it.
Yeah.
So that is a very politically correct statement, and that is the line the government, the authorities take. So the only difference is that this time there has been a protest, and this has become part of the larger news outside the northeast, outside Meghalaya, and earlier I might tell you that they were not even ready to register an FIR in this particular instant. and thanks to some other organizations situated outside the Northeast. So the pressure, enough pressure has been built, and FIR has been lost finally. But still, the ground is that some peace committee, peace meeting also has been held. In a way, which is a good thing actually. Some members of different communities were called, and some peace kind of a community was held, and things are okay now. There is no communal conflagration as happening now, so the things have cooled down. But then, like I said, this is a pattern. It's nothing out of the ordinary, and there is a pattern. Yeah.
I know we are a little bit over time, but I have a last question for you, which I just want to know out of personal interest. Are there communities that have or people that have converted who want to come back to their previous faith? And if so, is it possible for them? And I mean, is it possible for them in the sense of, does society accept them again back?
Yes, yes. This is a very encouraging trend, actually, Ramji. I'm glad you asked this question. I'll tell you what has happened is that earlier, over a very long period of time, the church exercised a very tight control over the affairs of the tribal people. So much so that inside the church, the indigenous musical instruments were not allowed.
Hmm.
They have khasis, and they have some instruments called dvitara and all. They're very unique, so they were not allowed to play it inside the church, and you'll be surprised, shocked in fact to know that converted Christians are forbidden from wearing, putting on their traditional ethnic dress, dancing in indigenous festivals. This is against the religion. So much so that you cannot, once you are converted, you cannot put on your ethnic dress and then perform, be a participant in the indigenous festivals. I think that has led many, because Khasis and Jaintias are very educated people. They are ready to beginning to question. Okay, our Christianness is Christianness is very, I mean, prominent. But what about our Khasiness? So what about our Khasiness? So do we, because Christianity in Meghalaya has come only, let's say, in the last 100 years. The most of the major conversion has happened in the last 60 to 70 years. So don't we have history before that Christians came to this place? We came to the hills. So what about pre-Christian history? So that is already being asked, and a lot of encouraging trend, like I was saying, is that in the last during this lockdown, many people have found time to write articles on their faith, how the Christian faith is coming in conflict with their indigenous faith, how their indigenous faith is so like Pavit Davi was saying, it's a very Sanatan culture. They are practicing the purest form of Vedic culture. Obviously, they don't call it their a Hindu culture or Sanatan. It's okay with that. We don't have to call them as Hindus or Sanatans. But the way they worship their nature, the way their philosophy of preservation of their nature, forest. So it is absolutely mind blowing. One of the best cultures in keeping in context the present situation of the world is concerned, is indigenous cultures. So I think it's a very, 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 I mean, it really saddens me, saddens people like us to see that, these indigenous cultures are just fading away. The encouraging trend is that people are coming back there are instances where regularly people are coming back and society is accepting them. Yes, that's happening.
Well, thank you, Shankarji, for so effectively giving us a snapshot of the on-ground situation in Meghalaya. And of course, it seems a little dark on one hand, but it's very, very encouraging, like you said, to know that people are taking a renewed interest in their own traditions and culture and their indigenous ways of life, because I think that is how one's identity is preserved, and a person without an identity, it's is a person without a direction. But having said that, you said something very interesting about fear psychosis, and I agree with you, because as somebody who's grown up in an urban city, in Delhi, which has been very peaceful, I remember when I went to interview the Hajjons, it took me I went for a 3-day visit, and it took me 5 days to just convince them to meet me.
Yes.
And it was in the dark, and we had to go, we had to go very quietly. We had to make sure nobody would see us. And, I never could take that gentleman's name because it would pose a problem for him. And I remember thinking at that point that, are we living in the same country? Because, this is not what I was used to. We're used to saying what we want to, where we want to. And that was very, very unfortunate to see. But thank you, Shankarji, for
My
really
pleasure.
shedding so much of light on things that really need to be out there.
Thank
But
you.
I must come to our next panelist. Uh, our next panelist is from Assam, Shrutikar Abhijit Sarma. Abhijit is a leading scholar on the subject of satras, and as I have lived in Assam for over, I think, 2 years while doing my research and field work, it's always been a wonder to me why the issues surrounding Satra have not got the attention nationwide that it deserves. Because it's been brewing for a really long time. It's not a new issue. But to explain the situation more, I would like to begin by asking Abhijit, what comes to your mind in this context when we discuss deculturalization?
Well, Ramiji, when I think about deculturalization, my prior panelists have explained it so beautifully. I don't think I need to delve deep, but yet I will share my thought when it comes to deculturalization in any. For me, deculturalization is a vivid and comprehensive subject. And when I hear the word deculturalization, it strikes to me as an antithesis to the organic process of culturalization. Mostly an artificial mechanism to destroy the prevalent culture and traditions of a place or a community, and a nefarious intent to forcefully establish a foreign set of beliefs which otherwise is unknown to the indigenous population. What I also feel is that the final goal of deculturalization as a tool is to establish socio-political supremacy over the native population and secure their loyalty for a centralized non-native theological institution, whatever it may be. And for example, for the very first invasions that happened in across India, let us take the example of Bakhtiyar Khilji, who not only destroyed Nalanda and Takshashila, but was one of the first few invaders who forced upon conversions. So they attempted deculturalization of the native population as a means to rule over the conquered subjects while extensively using the might of sword. And also in the later colonial period, they utilized the rule of law against while the prior invaders used the sword, they used the rule of law, and to an extent the education as a means of deculturalizing the natives, and use proselytization in a manner that they can garner loyalty. As deculturalization is a process of destroying indigenous faiths and traditions of a community or a region, say in Northeast, with a motive of establishing theological subjugation. Similarly, when I think about deculturalization in Northeast in particular, it comes to my mind that it's a malice attempt of destroying the native faiths and traditions followed by the various tribes residing in across Northeast. And finally, being an Assamese and a keen observer of the issue, I see encroachment of Satras as the most striking attempt for achieving deculturalization of Assamese society, because Satras are the very soul of Assam and the Assamese society.
Yeah, yeah. Correct. This is what I noticed there, that it is such a hub of all cultural, religious, activity. But, just for our viewers who might not be familiar with the Satras, could you shed a little light on the origins and the importance of Satras to Assamese society?
I'll try to answer that in two parts. First, I will try to brief about what stands for Satras. Satras are essentially monasteries, like ashrams, where devotees reside and practice yoga, philosophies, and study other holy scriptures and they spread spirituality across the society. The word Satra is originally derived from a Sanskrit word called Shalra, which means a sacrificial session of duration more than 12 days. Shalra basically is a sacrificial session that extended beyond the period of 12 days. So, Sattadhikar C.C. Narayan Desandra Goswami, one of the pioneers or academicians behind the Satra culture, in his book Satya Sanskriti Ruprekha, has written about Satra to be a place where a lot of devotees reside, where donations are made by the society, where people thrive from the donations alms made by the society, and where life drives in spiritual satisfaction. However, many experts on the subject believe that Padbasi Satra, established by Sri Damodar Dev, was one of the first full-fledged satras in Assam. However, there are other evidences that point that satras were in existence prior to the Vaishnavite area of which was started by Shri Shankar Pandey. So what happened in 1970, if I could recall properly, there was an archaeological excavation going on in Ambari area of Guwahati, where a stone inscription was found. It was deciphered by a very noted historian, Kamrupa historian of that time, Dr. P.C. Chaudhary. He deciphered it to state that it meant that it was indicating to a era around 13th century AD, which was reigned by a monarch called Samudrapal. It was written in the stone inscription that Samudrapal's reign was shining like the bright sun, and his kingdom had a residential satra, where religion was practiced in all the three forms. So what I can think of the three forms of religion might be the major three sects of the Hindu fold, Sakta, Saiva, and Vaishnava forms. So, however, Satra in the present form, now in the Vaishnava form, started becoming a crucial part of the Assamese society from the later part of the 15th century. And coming on to why Satras are so important for Assam, the Satras are an essential part of the Assamese society, and they play a very crucial role for the entire Assamese society. The Satra as an institution started growing from the later period of 15th century and quickly became centers of learning. They become religious studies center, fine arts. For example, if you go to Majuli, you'll find very unique mask art. They adorn mask and they do a quite interesting dance, obviously derived from the scriptures. And apart from that, they hosted libraries. There are very rare manuscripts are found still preserved in those libraries. There are museums where very unique, historically important artifacts are being preserved there. It functioned as health centers, Ayurvedic centers, and apart from all these, satras were accepted as arbitration centers. So what happened when in the ancient days there was no police or law, when there were quarrels among the villages or within the villages, people used to go for satra for solution, and the verdict that whatever the satra gave, people used to accept without any ado. So there was a reverential position of the satras. Satra as an institution was revered by the society and forms a very integral part of the Assamese society. And I believe Satra was one of the reasons the Assamese society as a whole was insulated from proselytization activities for long. It was the Satras that saved us for long. But the way it is declining, the proselytization activities are also increasing.
Abhijit, I'd like to ask you to describe a little bit the physical form of the satras, in the sense that is it a large piece of land? Does it have, a building? What is the physical description? Because it is difficult for somebody who hasn't visited Assam to visualize it.
Assam is in a very, if I can put it very simply, it's kind of an ashram. It's mostly similar to how it is across the nation, like mutts where gurus stay and their disciples stay. To simply put it, it's like an ashram or mutt where religious studies are done.
And so this land must be valuable as well.
Yes, land is very valuable. In fact, the whole existence of Satra is dependent on the land.
Correct. And how many would you say there are across the state?
Across Assam, it should be around 809. What they have put in the Assam Satra Mahasabha. Assam Satra Mahasabha is an umbrella organization of all the Satras in Assam and in Bengal. Because see, earlier Satras were spread across the geographical boundary of Assam. There are still Satras in Dimapur, there are still Satras in West Bengal, there are even Satras in Garo Hills, used to be, but now they are irrelevant because they have been abandoned. So in the data they had provided is 809 Satras still active.
So what would you say is the major causes of threat to the satras, to that way of life, and to the establishment as a whole?
For that, I will like to go little back in history. See, when satras became an integral part of the society, kings and nobility then started understanding their importance and made huge donations towards these satras to help these satras thrive and manage their sustenance. Most of these donations were made in the form of rent-free agricultural lands. And what the satras did? Satras rented out this cultivable land to the tenants, and in return, the satra received a portion of the tax of the produce as a tax. This holistic practice helped the institution of satras to generate necessary revenue and thus sustain themselves. There are evidences where which suggest that even the colonial regime, which was dead against this satra structure, even they allowed the satras to maintain this status quo of rent-free agricultural lands. However, things started changing in around the pre-partition era, So what happened? Many of people might not know, the first government that was formed in Assam in the colonial era was of Muslim League, led by Syed Sadullah. So Muslim League leader was the prime minister. Then it was called the prime minister of Assam province. So what they did, they had their mind to carve out Assam in their so-called to be the East Pakistan area. So what they did, they institutionalized influx of migrants, Bangladesh, East Bengal migrants, Muslim migrants, mostly Muslims, into Assam, so that they can have the proper numerical number. So when they put the claim for Assam to be included in East Pakistan, then they have a genuine call. The problem started from there, and even though with the effort of Lakshmanath Gopinath Bordoloi, Assam was saved from going into East Pakistan. Yet the cause of appeasement continued in the reign of Congress also, and the systematic appeasement that happened, and systematically the Congress government ignored the issue, and encroachment of Satra evolved into a cancer, and this slowly choked many Satras to death. And in 2010, Sri Bhadrakrishna Goswami, the then advisor to all Assam Satra Mahasabha, had raised this issue of Satra land encroachment with the governor of Assam. Most probably it was Sri Janki Pallab Patnaik, if I could remember correctly, and had alleged that around 85% of the Satra land were under encroachment by illegal Bangladeshi Muslim migrants, and 39 of these Satras were worse still. And moreover, these migrants not only encroached Satra's land, but at times resorted to violence and forced many devotees and Satra diggers to flee, causing abandonment of the Satras. Moreover, there were brutal incidents in the past also, where Satra diggers were beheaded. Women folk of the Satra land were gang raped and dumped in the field. So there are a lot of, and additionally, now proselytization is also a new threat to the Satras. If I can recall it properly, last year around, I guess, in the month of May or June, Baptist Church had illegally encroached the Satra land belonging to a Satra in Majuli. Just imagine, Majuli is the heartland of Satra. It's called the Satra land. There only Baptist Church illegally occupied the land of Satra. And not only that, when the Satra Dikar filed a complaint and it was removed, they filed a case against the Sattadhikar, and Sattadhikar had to take a bail. This is for the first time happened in the history of 600 years of the Satras, I think. So this is the reality of this situation right now.
My God. So this land that has been encroached, has there been any cases of the Satras framework being able to get it back? Or
there had been attempts here and there, but there we cannot see. I have not seen any centralized effort. So there have been somewhere they have freed encroachments. Then in other place they encroach it, but there is not a centralized effort. I don't see that.
Correct. Abhijit, I would like to ask you a last question. You've really sort of delved deep into the situation that the Satras face today and the impact of it on, culture and tradition in Assam. But what would you suggest would be a way to safeguard the general framework and integrity of the Satras?
See, although there are multiple options available, but yet from a policy perspective, if I have to give this an answer, I think the best viable option is to conceive a department or a commission dedicated to safeguarding the affairs of Satras. Like Pai Dawe has said that Department of Indigenous Affairs has been commissioned by the Arunachal government. Similarly, on the same lines, a commission or a department should be conceived. Most probably under the Home Department or the CM, headed by an IS and IIPS officer, and with a definite budget, annual budget, and a private partnership model, so that private players can be a part of that safeguarding process. And because I think one more example is already there, because out of the Assam Andolan, Assam agitation, the government of Assam formed a separate department, implementation of Assam Accord. There's a separate completed department with definite budget and everything. So if that can be done, this is also very important, because the unique identity of Satra is not available anywhere else. You can say it's a geographical indicator of Assam. So it must be safeguarded with all preemptive actions.
Absolutely. Agreed. Thank you, Abhijit. I think this was truly very important to discuss, and I really hope that through our discussions today and through the series that Delhi Thinkers Dialogue is doing, all these situations get the focus that they deserve. And of course, one of the common threads that I have noticed in all the three discussions has been the importance of political and government will to do this. So I hope. The right people will notice what you have said today. But as we are limited on time, otherwise I could discuss this for another couple of days. But as we are limited on time, I would really like to move on to our expert legal point of view from Mr. Ram Mayappan. Uh, Ram, I would really ask you, to begin with, if you could tell us a little bit about what you think about the facts that have been brought to light today and what you really think are the provisions that the legal framework can offer for protection or already do for these minority communities that are under threat in this region.
Namaste to everyone. First of all, thank you for having me among such an eminent group of people who've been working hard on the field and to their knowledge. And kudos and hats off to the commendable work that Delhi Thinkers Dialogue has been doing during the course of the pandemic and post that with these virtual conferences and interactions among people. Uh, but going beyond that, first, I think before we get into the discussion, we need to understand uh, a lot of us, people living in urban areas, or for someone who's living out far down the southern part of the country, it's as if we've been living under a cave when I heard their stories. Uh, or even information about what's been happening there over the years. I've always thought of myself as being fairly informed, reasonably read, uh, and I've traveled quite extensively, and I've got a good diverse group of friends. Uh, but to even hear some of these things uh, is surprising and shocking, to say the least. Uh, and that doesn't just come from an emotional standpoint of view, but even just from a basic human value point of view. The entire world is talking about uh, diversity, is talking about protecting integrity of groups of people, and we in a country that talks about Vasudeva Kudumbakam uh, is finding it hard to protect its own, is something that's very hard to state and hard to believe. Uh, but the reality, both from the numbers and from the people who actually live amongst those, uh, is true, and it's something that we need to discuss, not just in small groups, but in large numbers, and in at the most powerful of offices as well. Uh, uh, Mr. Dawe discussed how some of those people in Arunachal have been affected, and despite the legal framework in Arunachal being considered one of the strongest in the country, with the anti-conversion laws, uh, not being able to do enough to protect the people there, and leaving the anti-conversion laws, but also the transition of people across territories in Arunachal being a lot harder, but we have still been able to see people infiltrate into Arunachal Pradesh, change the demographics of the state. And going beyond that, not just talking of pure numbers, we're talking about identity, something that we've been living with for years together, and something that our forefathers have been living for however long. They've been able to go through different stages of colonization, uh, from the British, the Mughal era, invasion from neighboring territories, and so on. But in a democratic and a constitutional structure, if we are not able to protect our own, then it's a very sad state of affairs.
Yes.
So that being the first surprise point for me, uh, I think there is something that we as people that need to do something immediately, and something that our state, either the district authority or the local authority or even our state governments start doing is something that helps us start keeping a record. Uh, a lot of us uh, just look at folklore as stories told and our places of worship, our land, uh, from the information that we gather from each other. but we do not have records of these things. So I think the first step is actually recording and making instruments that tomorrow we can identify and state that these were practices that we did, these were places that we worshipped at and or used for a certain facility and purpose. That's something that's been lacking in the indigenous population around the world, and more so in India, because it was a given that we invited everyone, and I think right at the start, uh, we were told ekam sat uh, vipra bhavatu vadanti. So when we look at the entire construct, we believe that everyone comes to cohabit in a very peaceful environment. But the world is changing, and I think we need to adapt to that changing requirement. Start recording and placing instruments that ascertain what our position is. Uh, Sometimes we don't necessarily lack state help. Shankarji was talking about how, though the village councils and the tribal councils, or in some cases even the district administrative councils existed, they did not do their desired jobs because the numbers were more important at the end of the day. So electoral politics played a larger role than protecting the integrity of the community. So something that we as people should do immediately. There is something like Google Culture and Google Records or Google Museum. Those are technological tools by which we can identify, record by video and other evidences, dropping Google pins, taking a complete 360-degree view of the entire site and so on, and create records. And I think there are more other ways. That is just one simple open source way for someone, for a layman to be able to do that. And another thing is to ensure that our archaeological societies keep record of certain institutions. And another thing is the tribal advisory council, which works under the district administration, uh, should start taking the records of these, because that tribal advisory council under the district administration is tasked with preparing a report and supplying that report to the governor of the state, who then supplies his reports to the president of the country and to the minority affairs council and to other commissions across the country. We have failed to record these things. But a lot of the other institutions, we were talking about missionaries, we were talking about transient institutions that come in, they ensure that their instruments are put on record and these records are shared across the country. And another industry that we need to talk about is academic journals. We have academic journals across the world that talk about how missionaries have been an instrument of social change, but we have not talked about how missionaries have been part of deculturalization. The entire framework around which the American institution today is framed is deculturalization of the indigenous population there. It's not very different with how the missionaries are working in India either. But we fail to see that. The world has seen that across North America, South America, Africa, and now I think they are moving slowly to Southeast Asia and the Indian subcontinent.
Yes.
This is something that we need to see. We keep talking about economic interference, but we fail to see this faith-based interference that's there from these institutions. So I think first fall is for us to recognize the problem, discuss the problem with all of us, and start creating records to protect our institutions, our practice, our customs and traditions, and creating reports of these both at state institutions and then with academic institutions. Because if you see doctoral dissertations, we see very, very few people who take up to write on our indigenous studies. As soon as we talk about indigenous studies, a lot of our urban population talks about Red Indians. We don't talk about the Indians who live here, who are indigenous population that need to be studied, understood, and protected. Even from us, I'm not talking just from missionaries, other religions, and other establishments. Even from myself, like a lot of affluent people economically and socially would like to have properties in the Northeast, in these tribal areas, just because this virgin land provides for such clean air, good green soil that is very fertile. And one could be for commercial gain or for our recreational gain. I think we have to sway away from this colonial mindset that we go to these people to enjoy a holiday. It is not a holiday destination for me. It's a place that we need to protect. It's a place that also protects us from the depleting ozone hole, from the pollution that the entire world is looking at. So that's the point of view that we need to bring out to the entire world. Uh, we've been talking about our environment protection laws. Leave aside our religious protection laws, land protection laws. There are district council enacted forest land protection laws. There are larger forest protection laws and land protection guides for tribals that both the center and the respective state governments have enacted. Leave that aside, but look at the broader Environment Protection Act. That is something that we need to take a hold of. That provides room for public consultation. Our people, as soon as they see some development coming up, will have to be able to send reports to the Ministry of Environment, the state environment authorities, and state that these things do not just infringe upon our personal rights, but also on the environmental conditions here. What we need to protect is the virgin land and the virgin air and soil and so on. So that, I think, is the first step of record keeping, and we start public participation. The next stage of citizen participation starts from this environment protection. Anytime we see something wrong, I think a lot of us people do not want to be part of the entire dispute, do not want to get involved in the tussle. We feel that there's always a third person who can come and fight my rights. That was part of our freedom struggle, and that today is again a problem. I think anyone who is even mildly concerned will have to, at a minimum, write a complaint. And today, you don't have to be involved in the entire dispute resolution process. As simple as something like sending a tweet, putting a post on Facebook could bring up reactions. So I think people will have to start there where they call for others' attention, identify a problem, and make it public. Getting away from the problem is not something that is going to solve the issue at all. So I think that's where we will have to start. And in my first bit of the discourse, I think I'm lost with the second question. So I'll let you raise the question again and get back to it. Yes.
Ram, actually, while you were talking, you gave me a couple of ideas. So I'm going to digress from the question that I asked before. Yes. I'm going to ask you another question. I've always wondered with anti-conversion laws, I mean, they're here to protect against, I would assume, and I may be wrong, I would assume a sort of inducement-based conversion, right? So whether it's cash transactions or whether it's for any sort of benefit. But largely through my experience in the Northeast, and of course the experts on my panel can correct me if I'm wrong, one of the things I've noticed is one, the conversions are usually based on aggression, on the tip of the gun. There are insurgent groups that have made a living for decades now by just forced conversions. There is, and this is documented. Another way is cash inducement, so, and there are also factions, especially where there is a missionary sort of incursion. There are factions, whether it's Baptist or whether it's Protestant, so everybody has a price. One of the other things I've noticed is that it's the most sensitive parts of society that are usually sort of focused on for any sort of conversion. So it's never the upper middle class. It's never the urban city folk. It's always either simple, innocent, indigenous tribes, or the lower economic strata of our society. So all these factors, do they not somehow override or fall into what should be considered, illegal?
See, I will take your question and answer it in three parts. First, if the question is, do we need a better, stronger legal framework and implementation mechanism to curb unlawful conversion, legal conversion, however you want to term it, then yes, that would be a great position to start. But do we have an existing framework that could help? Then yes, we do have something that could help, that could deter, and that can protect. And going from there, I think there are two ways to look at it. One is from a sociological and a people-centric point of view, and another one just purely from the legal point of view. From the legal point of view, let me answer first. Article 25 of the Constitution provides everyone the right to practice, propagate, and promote their religion, practice, ideology, and faith. But while we speak of that, does that come unperturbed and free and do it in any manner they want? But the Constitution itself lays down a restriction that will have to be free and fair and not by force. That's where the Constitution stops. But then majority of the other law, even the Indian Penal Code, the basic criminal code that we have in the country, restricts anything being done by force. That force can be inducement, can be threat, can be people-based, can be faith-based, uh, can be abetment by a group of people. Uh, all of it is restricted by law, just by the Indian Penal Code. You don't have to have an anti-conversion law uh, to do that for us. But then 8 states in the country have done it beautifully, and Arunachal in this case very well. What they have taken into account is all these three instances that you said. They said force is something that cannot be there, fraud is something that cannot be there, inducement is something that cannot be there. In fact, they went further to actually define all the three and said how force would play and how inducement would play.
Correct.
So force would include all of the measures that you were talking about. It could be threat of injury, any kind, including threat of divine displeasure or social excommunication. So it does not have to be physical harm or reputational harm or economic harm, but it could just be the fact that you attempting to pray to some god could mean that you would be disowned from the entire social construct, uh, is force in that particular position. So it's as simple as that. And fraud, just the smallest modicum of thought for us in fraud. Just basic lying, saying that something could happen and deceiving someone would be included there. And inducement, I think both yourself and Shankar sir had put it as to how these missionaries brought about other institutions. And Dawe sir had talked about how charity for the sake of charity and not actually being charity will still be brought under that inducement angle, where they do not just let people believe, see for themselves, and then change their position. Uh, See, a natural person, by their own readings, by their interaction with friends, could change their belief systems. That's totally acceptable and not restricted. But if I do it because someone induces me, because I could potentially get a job, or I could go to school, get a scholarship, or I would get better medicines, or I would get access to live in a particular place, or the most basic of things, I would get acceptance from my friends and my from peer group. That in itself is opposed to law.
Yes.
So that's the place that we have to start out and say that it's already opposed to law, it's opposed to the Indian Penal Code, it's opposed to an anti-conversion law, like in the state of Arunachal Pradesh or in the state of Orissa, and say that's restricted. So there is a framework. But the sad part is, I think, like Shankar sir was talking about, it's the electoral gains that are restricted from the government taking strong action. But the advantage is that there is a position of private complaint. That's something that we can do. So the Penal Code and the Criminal Procedure Code provide us with powers to provide a private complaint. We could, if the police does not register a private complaint, then we could register a private complaint with the court. The court will have to register the complaint, conduct an inquiry, and only after that decide if that complaint can go away or if it mettles any, or if it meets out the basic standards, then will have to be proceeded further. So if the state does not act, the police do not act, then I have recourse to such a mechanism. So, Shankar was talking about how in states like Meghalaya, even though the Hindu population or these particular tribal populations are a minority, they are not being considered minority for constitutional purposes or for a purpose of special privileges and so on. So there was a case that was dealt before the Supreme Court not too long ago in 2019. A parliamentarian from BJP had filed a case, Ashwani Kumar Upadhyay,
Yes,
if I'm right.
yeah.
Uh, but and the Supreme Court refused to grant such a right after referring the matter to the National Minority Commission. But the workaround the Supreme Court talked about is states were divided on the basis of language and not on the basis of religion. That's the reason that religion cannot be used as a reason for granting someone a minority status in any given state. But if you look at that, then if language is the basis on which minority rights are being granted, then we should work around minority linguistic populations in any given state, taking advantage of them being minorities there and promote their practices and practice that goes around with other communities in any given state. So I think the workaround should be using their minority position as a linguistic minority, not as a religious minority. That way, that helps them start protecting their cultural and traditional identities. Especially a lot of the tribal populations, the indigenous populations across the Northeast, have their own languages to work from. Some of them might not have been given the credit in the national charter as the official language, but they are still minority languages, even within their own states. Therefore, I think they will have to establish institutions to take that minority privilege and set up academic institutions or other post-secondary institutions or even official organizations, non-governmental organizations that can work for the benefit and empowerment of those communities.
Correct, correct.
Can I come in?
Shankarji, Mr. Daveji, would you like to make a comment on that?
Let me add one comment, Ramiji, if you allow.
Yes, please.
Yeah. In case of our esteemed panelist, Mr. Ramaswamy was mentioning now, there is a twist to it. Actually, yes, we are thinking of filing a petition in the PIL in the High Court regarding the granting of minority status to indigenous communities. But in the linguistic basis, if you file, what happens is that they speak the same language. You know, they are linguistically they are not minorities. In terms of Khasis, what happens is, suppose in Arunachal Pradesh, Nisis are Christian Nisis and indigenous Nisis. They speak the same language. So indigenous Nisis cannot be considered as linguistic minorities. Similarly, in Meghalaya, what happens is that Khasis who have converted are they amount to 90% of the population. So 10% who have not converted are also Khasis. Their native tongue also is Khasi. So linguistically, they cannot be considered as minorities. So religion, they can have, they can be protected only on the ground of religious minorities. So that I just wanted to add that. Yeah. Having said that, what happens is that suppose Meghalaya, there are Bengali speaking people are there, Hindi speaking people are there, Nepali speaking people are there, Assamese speaking people are there. So they can be protected. They can avail this benefit of linguistic minorities. But indigenous communities, tribal communities, they cannot.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah.
One more thing, if I may come in.
Yes, please.
Yes. See, one more thing that could potentially be done is the autonomous district councils have the powers under Schedule 5 and 6 of the Constitution to have, or when they are under scheduled areas, to identify and do things for the empowerment and protection of those tribal regions that are scheduled areas which are under their administration. So I think the first step would be, if it is not already part of the functioning or the prerogative of that administrative council or the district administrative council, that they include this as an objective of theirs, and they do create regulations to protect the interests of the minorities there, create mechanisms to protect the traditions and practices. This is constitutionally provided, and framework has already been made. And multiple commissions, not just of the minority affairs, but of tribal affairs, and various ministries have worked around this. Majority of the time, it only goes towards empowerment and economic development. So the MSME ministry takes up a lot of the work, but our Ministry for Culture or other ministries do not take up a lot of the recommendations actively. I think a push will have to be done to that extent. So might we start with the representation? If the Autonomous District Council acts on it, great for us. If they do not, then the next step would be to push that representation to the state government. And when they don't, then you can proceed to the High Court asking for the Autonomous District Council or the state government to consider legislating or bringing out some mechanism to actually protect the integrity of these communities, protecting those traditions and practices. So that could be a first step to start. And I think if this becomes a movement across multiple district administrative zones, then that would be actively pursued by the state also. Because electorally, I understand that another community or the missionary group might have a larger number, but there could be points on which they are divided as well. And even if you're of a smaller number, I think the winning margins is what matters to them. So I think that should something that should be considered. No right or thought of any individual or any community should be left unattended.
Anything, anybody would like to comment on that?
I just want to share one observation that I've seen recently.
Yeah.
In the case of Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, what I've seen, most of the people belonging to the ST/SC communities who have been converted to Christianity, they have used false certificate claiming that they are SCs or STs and stood on elections on the reserved seats. So I've seen an incredible awareness among the people. I've seen many groups coming forward and filing lawsuits against them for falsification, because their ground was that once you have converted, you are no longer an SC, you are no longer a tribal because you have diverted from your traditional moorings. I don't know what the result came out, but it is an interesting trend that is starting, and I think if this becomes a movement, then some change, we can see some foreseeable change in the future.
Yes. As a matter of fact, Tamil Nadu has a law. So the state government sets up a committee every 3 years, if I'm right, and they go through the population registers and see how communities' population trends change and how people convert from one religion to the other. So even for Tamil Nadu, scheduled tribes and scheduled castes, if they convert from their indigenous original birth religion to something else, then they do not get to enjoy the privilege of being a scheduled tribe or a scheduled caste. But in Tamil Nadu, they're still given the privileges of being a most backward community, so which is not too different, but they do not get to enjoy the forest lands rights and so on. But it is being misused at times by people. They do not change their names, though they're theologically they would have changed their position, but their names would mimic very similar to others. As a matter of fact, this is a question that Andhra Pradesh has raised a lot with Jagan Reddy, because he retains a community name and it's alleged that he's Christian by faith, but he claims that he's neither. So the verdict is still out on it, but yes, that is an issue to be seriously
he has confessed. I have seen an interview where he has confessed that he's a Christian and he keeps the Bible with him all the time. I think it was with Rajiv Sardesai. He has openly declared.
Yes. But then he's also taken the stand again just before the 2019 elections, if I'm right, that he went to the temples, then he worshipped and he took a spiritual bath and so on. So, and retaining the community name goes a long way, because in smaller communities, you get recognition of being a relative. You would have converted in your religion, but you're still a close kin of the family and the larger group in that town. Something that I've seen very different in pockets of Himachal Pradesh and in a particular region called Anamalais in the Tamil Nadu Kerala border in the hilly area, that when someone converts their religion and goes away, there are these traditional rites that you're allowed to perform in major ceremonies. For instance, if the family's got a wedding, the uncle gets to perform a lot of customs to the marrying bride and the groom. But if you convert it, they do not grant you those rights. So when those privileges and that respect is lost, people consider actually converting back or losing the faith that they've taken into. So I think something to that effect should also be thought about us is to how we include people today so that they don't convert from their indigenous religion and go out of faith, but also to bring back people to faith. I think that that inclusion should be used as an instrument, that they get to participate in these systems and they are welcomed only by being part of the entire faith, but not just for the comfort of it.
You know,
Ramji, yeah,
sorry.
just allow me 10 seconds. He has raised a very pertinent issue. I think there is an urgent need to revisit the definition of tribal. Who constitutes a tribal? A person or the community who has abandoned all his or her ancestral practices, faith, ways of living, worship. Can that person or community be still branded as tribal? Like in case of Northeast, as soon as a child is born, the naming ceremony, they imitate as a, an American or a Western. The wedding is performed, in a very similar style a Western would do. A person dies, same practices followed. They have already abdicated their ancestral lifestyle, they are no longer tribal. So I think that the benefits which is accrued to a tribal, whether they should also are entitled to that benefits. So I think there is an urgent need to revisit the definition of tribal that should only be available to those people who are practicing their ancestral tribal way of life. So I think there is, I think it's only a matter of time, where I don't think so any government will have the, and who will be, is like who will bail the cat. I don't think so any government will do so. I think it's a matter which is, as the judiciary can be an answer to this. I think it's an only avenue. I think judiciary. So I like I said, this is an important issue, and I think definition of tribal should be revisited. Yes.
I think, drama, after listening to you, I think one of the issues that has come up, is going to come up, and is going to be something that we will need to create an entire new discussion for, is the fine line of, we know that this happens, we know inducement happens, we know that a 40% rise in, you know, uh,
Yes.
conversions is not all spiritual experiences. There is a lot of inducement involved, but I think being able to prove that this is what's happening and being able to actually bring the law down on this sort of functioning is a different matter of implementation altogether, because the way I would look at things is, if it's a spiritual sort of need for you to convert, that would be acceptable. But if it's anything else, I think that goes beyond the acceptable norms of civil society. But I think those are implementation issues, and for that we would need a completely new discussion. But
True.
Ram, I would really like to thank you for your opinion and for your legal expertise. It especially what you said about documentation is something that all our panelists have sort of mentioned and agreed that it is so important. And as tribal indigenous uh, ways of functioning, documentation has never been really a priority. And I also think what Mr. Dave is doing with videographing a lot of his culture, is very, very important, because the minute, societies become very visual. So the minute you can see culture and religion, visually, um, it brings you closer to it and it stops being alien to you. So thank you very much. But to conclude, I would like to say that our country and its traditions truly are rooted in the Sanatan Dharma. And that is, to me, egalitarian, has always been egalitarian in nature and will continue to be so. It's intrinsically so. Indigenous tribes, I feel, have been a part of our larger Hindu civilization, as well as our imagination, like nowhere else in the world. It is so unique, even in the Northeast, the civilizational connect is so strong, and it's rooted in ancient history. For instance, Hidimba, from the Mahabharata, is said to be from Dimapur. Arjuna is said to have traveled to Manipur, where he met Menaka. Rukmani is said to be from Arunachal Pradesh, and I believe she's also worshipped as a goddess. And these are only few of the examples. There are hundreds and thousands of more, but with this history being forgotten, we have seen these predatory forces in the region cause irreparable damage to not just culture, but to the national security of our country. It's time that I think we strengthen our resolve through our laws and our intelligentsia, like all of you, and reclaim our lost identity. And I think, the work all of you are doing is really so important, because it's going to preserve this uniqueness for generations to come. And if we don't do it today, then nobody else that's going to do it. Um, but thank you everyone so much. And this is the second part of our three-part series on the Northeast. And all of you can find, our audience can find our previous discussions on YouTube, on Facebook, as well as on Twitter. With that, I would like to thank our esteemed panelists and experts for being with us today. Thank you.